So we are a principal manufacturer of underfloor air conditioning systems, which is a system that we put into the floor rather than putting up in the ceiling. So we've been manufacturing this equipment for probably 25 years now. It used to be a system called Hiros, who typically made computer room AC units, so blowing cold air into rooms to cool servers. Our managing director at the time, Glenn Blake Thomas, was the European divisional director of Hiros and was the main distributor in the UK. There was a project he was asked to produce for a commercial pension fund who wanted to use the crack units in a commercial setup, and that gave birth to the idea of the underfloor air conditioning system and the birth to the fan tile, which is the active unit that brings the air up into the space. I always say when I'm talking to architects or people who haven't come across the system, you think about a ceiling-based system and just flip it 180 and drop it into the floor. So in order for our system to work, there has to be an existing raised access floor. And then we use that void, so the space underneath that floor, to blow conditioned air. So then that becomes a plenum, an air plenum. And then that air is blown down into the floor by the downflow unit, which we actually call CAM units, which stands for conditioned air module. And then the air is blown into the floor and is brought up into the space in a nice, smooth, subtle plume up into space via the fan tile units. So we negate the need for ceiling-based systems and all that pipe work and duct work and all that kind of cold air from high level, and people complain about cold chills down their necks. I mean, ergonomically speaking, and that's why AET stands for Advanced Ergonomic Technologies, is ergonomically the system is better designed, because typically when we're in a normal commercial office space, you've got air conditioning come down from high level. The most sensitive parts of our body are our shoulders and our neck and our head, so that's where we feel the air first. But with bringing the air up into the space, typically most of us are clothed from the feet upwards, so because the air is induced into the space anyway, we don't get any issues with cold spots or cold drafts. So one of the huge benefits of the system is you negate that need for those cold drafts on high level, which is probably, other than the boss and maybe salary, the number one complaint of people in office spaces. So again, it's a very inobtrusive, very subtle way of bringing air up into an office space. Historically, it's always been very much an architectural product. So architects have really kind of been the main route to market, when the architects could see the beauty of the system, how it removed all that ceiling-based system. So for an architectural point of view and an internal aesthetic, you're getting rid of that very kind of industrial, kind of overbearing ceiling-based system that all architects have to factor into the internal design of the space, and you're removing all that. So one of the big benefits for architects is that design freedom. So maximising floor-to-ceiling heights, having a nice clean soffit, especially in existing buildings. But I think all our projects, from when we first started to pretty much where we are now, have always been refurbishment buildings. So when you work in existing slab to slab buildings that haven't been designed to be office spaces, being able to take away that 500 or 600 mil in the ceiling maximizes floor to ceiling heights. Typically there's enough floor void or enough space within the floor void for the fan tiles to be included into floor, which we'll come on to in a bit, and then it just maximizes that floor to ceiling height. So you've got a bright, open, airy space. It also helps them to increase the height of the windows to bring in more light levels as well. So again, come back to kind of presenteeism and absenteeism and having a productive workspace is again one of the key benefits of the system in terms of making a less oppressive, less kind of enclosed working environment. We always used to say our system used to be looked at as a system of last resort, and now it's seen as a system of first choice. So you do get project teams who are saying, look, this is the only system we can use. The architect, we want to maximise floor to ceiling heights. We have to get that 2.7 really to be classed as commercial office space. So being able to use our system enables them to take that floor to ceiling up to 2.7. I mean, it is very much a different way of thinking now. It's the educational side of things. So a lot of people say, oh, this is a new system. We've never come across it before. We've been doing this 30 years now. So a lot of it is education, and it's getting people to change the way they look at buildings and how they condition office spaces. A lot of consultants kind of take this cookie cutter approach. They get their fee. They will know that ceiling-based systems work. They know what a four-pipe fan coil system does, or a VRF system or a VRV system does. And a lot of that is kind of led from the agents. So the agents are the ones advising clients about, this is your building, Mr. Client. This is what your kind of rents you're going to get. This is the kind of area, and the people or companies who are coming to that area, this is what we advise you to do. And they just kind of, they just go with what they're told. So a lot of it is educational. It is coming around. A lot more people are using the system. Typically, when people use it once, then they'll use it again. So a lot of the developers now work with, they've got 3 or 4 projects in the pipeline. Mostly people are always a little bit reticent about the system. But typically, if the architect or there's somebody that's within the project party who really want to use a system, we'll take them to one of our numerous sites in London. And when they come and see the site and they feel how the air comes out the floor and they see the temperature and the architect sees the nice bright open airy spaces. Typically when we take a project team around a site, the first thing they'll see, they'll feel the temperature, and there's no kind of cold blast, there's no icy cold drafts from high level, and it's a nice average temperature. You've got fan tiles pretty much every 10 meters within the space, but you don't feel the air. But when you stand directly on top of a fan tile, then you feel this nice cool plume of air. So one of the first things that we have to get people around to change their way of thinking is you don't get the Marilyn Monroe effect. You don't get this big plume of air and uncomfortable moments in the office. Another one that the agents or people are always concerned about is blowing paper off desks. So there's elements where you can't put a fan tile underneath a desk, or don't put a fan tile underneath somebody's chair or behind chairs because they're making noise because you're pulling a chair over the grill. So, there is limitations to the system, but the beauty of the system is when we come to take people to site is the fact that because it's an air plenum and it's just one big on a swimming pool of air, you can pick up a fan tile and relocate it within minutes. So as long as it's within that supply air, if you come into a space and you want to put a partition up and there's a fan tile in the floor, you don't have to worry about that. We move that fan tile, you put the partition up, and we just move the fan tile accordingly. With a ceiling-based system, you're kind of dictated to you. If you come into a space and you've got a ceiling-based system or high-level ductwork, and you want to put a partition on this mullion because you've got a lovely vista of St. Paul's or wherever you are in the city, you're kind of like, well, we really want to put it there. Does that mean then we've got to then pump down the system? We've got to remove all that pipe work, all that duct work. We've got to reconfigure it, and that's obviously cost. And it's also a lot of the TM65 that we're looking at in terms of sustainability and that waste material coming out of buildings. So again, looking at building churn, looking at how we reduce the amount of or the impact buildings have on the environment when a tenant comes in and starts reconfiguring a space is massive for us. So what we're looking at next, we're looking at localized UVGI. So back in the pandemic, there was a big calling for us to use UVGI, which is ultraviolet germicidal irradiation. So that's using UV light shone onto a titanium dioxide substrate, which then put ions into the airstream, which breaks down some moisture molecules that stop transfer of viruses. So that was a big thing for us in lockdown. Spent a lot of time looking at that. So that's locally, that's centralized within the CAM unit. We've now started looking at just doing it local to fan tiles. So say if Jean in accounts wants, she's feeling a bit unsure about virus or there's another pandemic or something, we can have them localized. So if the boss is sitting in the office, he can have a UVGI lamp in his fan tile, which then is just killing any viruses that's coming up into the space. So that's one thing we're looking at. A lot of architects are using the cams in a slightly different way in terms of the enclosure that they go in, and rather having a high-level grille that allows the air to come back into the top of the unit, they're using architectural louvered doors, which is great for the internal aesthetic, and it's a more functional way of having a big kind of gaudy kind of high-level return air grille. But because you can see into the enclosure, you can see this big kind of grey box. So we're now looking at changing the colour of the cams to be like a dark green, so it breaks up the shape of the cam. So that's another thing we're looking at. We're also looking at how functionality of the fan tiles work in terms of damper motors. So there's various different things coming on. I mean, obviously, we're always trying to push ourselves forward and move ourselves away from our competitors. Luckily, we don't have that many competitors, but obviously we're always looking to kind of differentiate our offering. And it's really just kind of getting that out there into the industry, and also pushing the whole sustainability side of things is going to be big for us moving into the next 5 years. It's fun when you see a project team and the penny drops and then they love the system. It's even better when you then take the client when we've post PC and they see how lovely the building looks, and for the architect. Main contractors now are coming on board. They see how the benefits are, how quick an installation is as well. So everybody within the project team are starting to kind of come around to this whole idea of, underfloor air conditioning it makes a lot of sense. So that's really good for us. And again, predominantly it's about developing those relationships with the big main contractors, with the big developers and the architects, and really kind of instilling our foundation within the industry. When I started with the company, we were having maybe 2 or 3 projects a year, and the size of projects were relatively fairly small. Since I've started, or not because I started, but since I've started, the size of projects are getting bigger. So it's exciting for us to see how the company's grown. I started with the company with probably about 8 of us. There's now probably about 28 to 30 of us. So the company has grown massively since in our 10 years. And it's always exciting, when you're passionate about a product and it is so different and it is so innovative and it's not your standard approach to ceiling-based system. There's a lot of passion, not just from me, from our operations director and managing director, who kind of instills all the passion into all the team moving forward. So again, it's just going out there and talking about it. And that's what us and myself and all the commercial team love doing, is getting out there and getting the word out there and really waiting for that light bulb moment when somebody realizes, underfloor air conditioning, it's not just something that we can use every now and then. This is an actual viable system. We're not going to be taken over from ceiling-based systems. We have our place, we know our lane, but because there's a lot of old buildings in London that need to be refurbished, then that's perfect for us.